3 months passed after the rescue, and life aboard the Endeavour returned to normal. Jake continued his duties, checking sensors, running patrols, and spending his free time with Danny in the mess hall. The excitement of saving an alien leader had faded into memory. Jake rarely thought about matriarch Zelvora anymore. He had heard that she made a full recovery and returned to her homeworld, but that was all. No messages, no contact, nothing. He didn't expect anything either. He had helped her because it was the right thing to do, not because he wanted a reward. One evening, Jake sat alone in his small cabin, talking to Danny through a video call. Danny was on a different shift, so they rarely saw each other in person these days. "You ever think about settling down?" Danny asked, munching on a protein bar. Jake laughed. "Settling down? Out here in space?" "You know what I mean, finding someone. Having a life outside this metal box." Jake leaned back in his chair and sighed. The truth was, he did think about it sometimes. He was 32 years old, and he had spent most of his adult life traveling between stars. He had dated a few people over the years, but nothing lasted. The loneliness crept up on him during quiet nights like this one. "Maybe someday," Jake admitted, "when I find the right person." "Good luck with that," Danny said with a grin. Not many options floating around in the void. They laughed and changed the subject, talking about sports and movies and other simple things. Neither of them noticed that their conversation was being monitored by sensors far more advanced than anything humans had built. 2 weeks later, everything changed. The Endeavour received an urgent diplomatic summons from Velarath Prime. The message was formal and direct, written in perfect human language. It requested the presence of Lieutenant Jake Harris for a ceremony of gratitude. Captain Laura read the message 3 times before calling Jake to her office. "This has never happened before," she said, handing him the tablet. "The Velarath have never invited a human to their homeworld, ever." Jake read the message and felt his stomach twist with nervousness. "Why me?" he asked. "Because you saved their matriarch, and apparently they take that very seriously," Laura explained. Laura assigned Jake a formal dress uniform and gave him a quick lesson in Velarath customs. Do not make direct eye contact for too long. Do not touch anyone without permission. Bow when greeted by someone of higher rank. Show respect at all times. Jake memorized everything, but he still felt unprepared when the shuttle landed on Velarath Prime. The planet was beautiful beyond words. The sky was a soft purple color, filled with clouds that shimmered like silk. The capital city rose before him, a collection of crystalline towers and floating platforms connected by bridges of light. Everything seemed to glow with an inner energy that made Jake feel like he was walking through a dream. A group of Velarath guards escorted him through the streets. They were tall and imposing, their violet skin darker than Zelvora's, their 4 arms carrying weapons that hummed with power. They said nothing to Jake, but their eyes watched his every move. The people of the city stopped to stare as he passed. Jake could hear them whispering, their voices a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. A human, here, walking among them. It was unheard of. Jake kept his head down and followed the guards. He felt small and out of place, a simple man from Ohio, surrounded by beings who had mastered the stars long before humans learned to make fire. The great house of Zelvora stood at the center of the city, a massive structure made of white crystal that reached toward the sky like a frozen flame. Jake was led inside, through hallways decorated with art and symbols he did not understand, until he reached a grand hall filled with hundreds of Velarath. They all turned to look at him. The silence was heavy. At the far end of the hall, sitting on a throne carved from a single piece of black stone, was Matriarch Zelvora. She looked different from when Jake had last seen her. Her wounds had healed, and she wore robes of deep blue that flowed around her like water. A crown of silver rested on her head, marking her status as leader. Jake walked forward, feeling every step echo through the chamber. When he reached the base of the throne, he bowed as Laura had taught him. Zelvora rose from her seat. The crowd gasped as she descended the steps and crossed the floor toward him. When she stood before Jake, she did something that made every Velarath in the room freeze with shock. She bowed to him. The murmurs spread like wildfire through the hall. A matriarch bowing to an outsider. It was unprecedented. It was impossible. Yet, it was happening. "You saved my life when you had no reason to," Zelvora said, her voice clear and strong. "You worked through the night, using tools not meant for my kind, refusing to let me die. You showed courage, compassion, and cleverness beyond what we expected from your species." Jake did not know what to say. He stood there, frozen, as the most powerful woman on the planet praised him in front of her entire house. "Among my people, such a debt cannot go unpaid," Zelvora continued. "We have watched you, Lieutenant Jake Harris. We have studied your actions, your words, your character, and we have found you worthy." Jake swallowed hard. "Worthy of what?" Zelvora smiled, a rare expression that softened her ancient features. "I heard you want a wife. My daughters are ideal for you." The hall erupted. Voices rose in surprise, confusion, and protest. Jake felt his face turn bright red as he tried to process what he had just heard. What?" he stammered. Zelvora raised a hand, and the hall fell silent again. "You confided in your friend about your loneliness," she explained, a hint of amusement in her silver eyes. "Your ship's communication systems are not as secure as you believe. I offer a solution to your problem, and a repayment of my debt." Jake wanted to disappear. He wanted to sink into the floor and never be seen again. But he forced himself to stand tall and respond. "With great respect, matriarch, I did not save you because I wanted something in return. Marriage should not be a reward." The crowd muttered again, this time with a different tone. Some looked offended. Others looked curious. But Zelvora simply laughed, a warm and genuine sound that echoed through the chamber. "And that, young human, is exactly why my daughters have already expressed interest in meeting you." She gestured toward the crowd, and 3 figures stepped forward into the light. They were beautiful in ways Jake could not fully describe, each one unique, each one watching him with eyes that held secrets he could not begin to understand. "Let me introduce you to my daughters," Zelvora said, "and then we shall see what fate has in store." Jake stood frozen in the grand hall as the 3 daughters of matriarch Zelvora approached him. His heart pounded so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. This was not how he had expected his day to go. He had come here thinking he would receive a medal, or perhaps a formal thank you. Instead, he was being offered the chance to marry into one of the most powerful families in the galaxy. The first daughter reached him and stopped just a few feet away. She was tall, even by Velaroth standards, with sharp features and a body built for combat. Scars marked her arms and face, each one telling a story of battles fought and won. Her silver eyes studied Jake with the cold precision of a predator sizing up its prey. "I am Kirazel," she said, her voice deep and commanding. "I lead the military forces of this house. I have killed enemies that would make your strongest warriors weep with fear. I have never lost a battle." Jake nodded politely, unsure of what to say. Kirazel continued to stare at him, her expression unreadable. "You are small," she observed, "and soft, but my mother says you have courage. I will be interested to see if that is true." Before Jake could respond, the second daughter stepped forward. She was different from her sister in every way. Where Kirazel was hard and sharp, this one was gentle and graceful. Her violet skin was lighter, almost lavender, and her silver eyes held warmth instead of ice. "I am Nyazel," she said with a slight bow. "I serve as a scientist and diplomat for our house. I have spent many years studying other cultures, learning their languages, understanding their ways." She tilted her head, examining Jake with genuine curiosity. "Humans fascinate me," Nyazel admitted. "Your species is so young, yet you have accomplished so much. You have survived wars that should have destroyed you. You have reached the stars despite all odds. I would very much like to understand how." Jake managed a small smile. "I am not sure I can explain all of humanity to you." Nyazel laughed softly. "Then perhaps you can start by explaining yourself. That would be enough for now." The third daughter hung back, hiding partially behind her sisters. She was the youngest, Jake could tell, with features that were softer and more delicate than the others. Her skin shimmered with bioluminescent patterns that shifted and changed like living art. Blues and greens and purples danced across her face and arms, responding to emotions she could not hide. Kirazel noticed her hesitation and stepped aside, pushing her forward gently. "This is Sarazel," Kirazel said, "the baby of our family. She is an artist, a dreamer. She spends more time with her paints than with people." Sarazel looked up at Jake with wide silver eyes. The lights on her skin flickered nervously, casting soft glows across the floor. "Hello," she whispered. "It is nice to meet you." Jake felt a sudden urge to protect this gentle creature. She seemed so different from the confident warriors and scholars surrounding her. There was an innocence about her that reminded him of his younger sister back on Earth. "It is nice to meet you too," Jake replied warmly. "Your skin is beautiful. The colors are amazing." Sarazel's patterns shifted to a warm pink, and she looked away shyly. Her sisters exchanged glances, surprised by how easily the human had made her blush. Matriarch Zelvora watched this exchange with satisfaction. She descended from her throne and joined the small group. "Now that introductions are complete, let me explain how this will work," she said. "You are not required to choose a wife today, Lieutenant Harris. That is not our way. Velarath courtship is a process of discovery. You will spend time with each of my daughters, learning about their lives, while they learn about yours. Only after this period of understanding may a match be considered." Jake nodded slowly. "And if I decide that none of them is right for me, or if they decide I am not right for them, then you leave as a friend of our house, with our gratitude and our respect," Zelvora answered. "There is no obligation, no pressure. This is an offer, not a command." Some of the tension left Jake's shoulders. At least he was not being forced into anything. This was simply an opportunity, strange as it was. "How long does this process take?" he asked. "1 month, Zelvora replied. "You will stay here on Velarath Prime as our honored guest. Accommodations have been prepared for you. Each of my daughters will have time to show you their world, and you will have time to show them yours." Jake thought about the endeavor, about his duties, about his life in space. 1 month was a long time to be away. But Captain Laura had already approved his leave of absence. It seemed everyone expected him to accept this invitation. And honestly, Jake was curious. He had never imagined meeting aliens like this, let alone being considered as a potential husband by 3 of them. It was terrifying and exciting all at once. "I accept," Jake said finally. "But I want to make one thing clear. I will treat your daughters with respect and honesty. I will not pretend to feel something I do not feel, and I will not make promises I cannot keep. If that is acceptable, then I am willing to learn." Zelvora's smile widened. "That is more than acceptable, Lieutenant. That is exactly what I hope to hear." She turned to her daughters. "Kirazel, you will spend the first week with our guest. Show him the strength of our people." Kirazel nodded, a hint of eagerness in her eyes. With pleasure, mother. Nyazel, you will take the second week. Show him the wisdom of our people. Nyazel bowed gracefully. I look forward to it. Sarazel, you will have the third week. Show him the soul of our people. Sarazel's patterns flickered with nervous energy, but she nodded quietly. And the fourth week? Jake asked. Zelvora looked at him with ancient, knowing eyes. The fourth week is yours, she said. You will show my daughters what it means to be human. Teach them about your world, your people, your heart. Let them see who you truly are. Jake took a deep breath. This was really happening. He was about to spend a month getting to know 3 alien princesses who might someday become his wife. His friend Danny would never believe this story. That night, Jake lay in a bed far too large for him, in a room made of crystal that glowed softly in the darkness. He stared at the ceiling and thought about everything that had happened. He had come to space looking for adventure. He had found something far stranger and far more wonderful than he ever imagined. Tomorrow, his time with Kirazel would begin, the warrior princess who had never lost a battle. Jake had a feeling she was going to test him in ways he could not predict. But he was ready. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he would face them the same way he always did. With courage, with kindness, and with an open heart. Outside his window, the purple sky of Velarath Prime stretched endlessly above. Somewhere in that vast universe, his old life waited for him. But right now, right here, a new chapter was beginning. And Jake was determined to make the most of it. The first week with Kirazel was brutal. She woke Jake before sunrise every morning, dragging him out of his comfortable bed and into a training courtyard made of polished black stone. The air was cold at that hour, and Jake shivered as he faced the warrior princess under the pale purple sky. Your body is weak, Kirazel announced on the first day. Your muscles are small, your bones are fragile, and your reflexes are slow. How do humans survive in this galaxy? Jake stretched his arms, trying to warm up. We use our brains mostly, and we help each other. Kirazel made a dismissive sound. Brains will not save you when an enemy blade is at your throat. Let us see what you can do. What followed was the most exhausting week of Jake's life. Kirazel taught him Velarath combat techniques, ancient forms of fighting passed down through countless generations. She moved like water and struck like lightning. Her 4 arms giving her advantages no human could match. Jake lost every single sparring match. He was thrown to the ground dozens of times, his body covered in bruises that changed color each day. But he never stayed down. Every time Kirazel knocked him over, he got back up and asked for more. By the 3rd day, Kirazel began to look at him differently. You cannot win, she said after their 10th match. You know this, yet you continue. Why? Jake wiped sweat from his forehead. Because giving up is not an option. If I stop trying, then I have already lost. But as long as I keep fighting, there is always a chance. Kirazel was silent for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She bowed to him, the same gesture of respect she used with fellow warriors. Humans are fragile, she admitted, but your spirit is unbreakable. That is a strength I did not expect. By the end of the week, Jake had not won a single fight. But he had earned something more valuable than victory. He had earned Kirazel's respect. The second week with Nyazel was entirely different. Instead of fighting, they spent their days in the great libraries of Velarath Prime. These were massive buildings filled with knowledge collected over thousands of years. Holographic displays showed images of distant planets, ancient civilizations, and scientific discoveries that made Jake's head spin. Nyazel was an eager teacher and an even more eager student. She wanted to know everything about humanity. She asked questions constantly, her silver eyes bright with curiosity. "Tell me about your wars," she said one afternoon, as they walked through a gallery of historical artifacts. Jake frowned. "That is a strange topic to be interested in." "Important." Nyazel stopped beside a display showing an ancient Velarath battle. "Every species has wars. They reveal what a people truly values and what they fear. Your species has fought countless conflicts, yet you always survive. How?" Jake thought about this for a while. "I think it is because we are stubborn. We destroy ourselves over and over, but we always rebuild. We always find a way to move forward, even when everything seems hopeless." Nyazel nodded slowly. "That is not weakness. That is something extraordinary. Most species who face such destruction simply fade away. Humans refuse to disappear." They talked for hours every day, discussing philosophy, history, art, and science. Jake learned about the Velarath's ancient past, their struggles and triumphs. In return, he told Nyazel about Earth, about its beauty and its problems, about the complicated nature of being human. By the end of the week, they had developed a deep friendship built on mutual curiosity and respect. The third week with Sarazel was the most surprising of all. The youngest daughter took Jake to the floating gardens, a series of platforms suspended high above the city, where plants from 100 different worlds grew in harmony. It was the most beautiful place Jake had ever seen, filled with colors and scents that overwhelmed his senses. Sarazel was quiet at first. She led him through the gardens without speaking, her bioluminescent patterns shifting nervously as she walked. Jake followed patiently, giving her space to feel comfortable. Finally, they reached a secluded area where Sarazel had set up her art studio. Canvases covered with strange and wonderful paintings surrounded them. Sculptures made of light and crystal hung in the air, slowly rotating. "This is where I come to create," Sarazel whispered. "No one else visits here, not even my sisters." Jake looked around in wonder. "Your work is incredible. I have never seen anything like this." Sarazel's patterns flickered with warm colors. "You really think so? Most people find my art strange. They do not understand what I am trying to express." Jake moved closer to one of the paintings. It showed a figure standing alone in darkness, surrounded by tiny points of light. The figure seemed both lost and hopeful at the same time. "I think I understand this one," Jake said softly. "It is about feeling small in a vast universe, but still believing that you matter. Still believing that there is beauty worth finding." Sarazel stared at him with wide eyes. "That is exactly what I meant." "How did you know?" Jake shrugged. "I feel that way sometimes, looking at the stars, wondering if I make a difference. Your painting captures that feeling perfectly." Something changed between them in that moment. Sarazel began to open up, showing Jake more of her work and explaining the emotions behind each piece. She talked about her dreams, her fears, her hopes for the future. "No one outside our world has ever understood," she whispered near the end of the week. "How do you see what others miss?" Jake smiled gently. "I just pay attention. Everyone has stories to tell. Most people are too busy talking to listen." By the end of the third week, Jake had formed unique connections with all three daughters. Kirazel respected his determination. Nyazel valued his curiosity. Sarazel treasured his understanding. News of the human suitor spread across the galaxy. Other species watched with disbelief and fascination. The primitive humans, forming bonds with one of the most powerful families in known space. It seemed impossible, yet it was happening. Diplomats and leaders discussed the implications. If a human could earn the respect of the Velarath, perhaps they had underestimated this young species. Perhaps humans were more than the simple creatures they appeared to be. The fourth week arrived, and it was Jake's turn to share his world. He did not have access to Earth, But he had something better. He had his stories, his memories, and his heart. He gathered all three daughters together and spent the final week teaching them about humanity. He showed them human music, playing recordings that made Kirazel tap her foot unconsciously. He taught them human games, laughing as Nyazel tried to understand the rules of baseball. He shared human food, watching Sarazel's patterns light up with delight when she tasted chocolate for the first time. But more than anything, he showed them human kindness, small gestures that meant nothing by themselves, but everything when combined. A gentle word when someone was struggling, a helping hand without being asked, a willingness to put others before yourself. The three daughters watched and learned. They began to see what made humans special, not their strength or their intelligence, but their capacity for connection, their ability to care about strangers, to find common ground with anyone, to build bridges where others saw only walls. As the fourth week ended, Jake realized something that surprised him. He had grown to care deeply about all three of these alien women. They were different from anyone he had ever met. Yet he felt closer to them than people he had known his entire life. Soon, Jake would have to make a decision that could change the course of history. But for now, he sat in the floating gardens with the three daughters of Zelvora, watching the sunset paint the purple sky in shades of gold. Whatever happened next, Jake knew one thing for certain. He would never forget this month, and these three remarkable women would never forget him. The morning of the final ceremony arrived with a soft golden light spreading across the purple sky of Velarath Prime. Jake stood in his room, staring at himself in the mirror. He wore formal robes that Matriarch Zelvora had given him, deep blue fabric that matched the colors of her house. He looked like a stranger to himself, this man from Ohio, dressed in alien clothing, about to face one of the most important moments of his life. A knock came at his door. It was time. The grand hall was even more crowded than before. It seemed like the entire population of the capital had come to witness this event. Word had spread across the galaxy, and representatives from dozens of species had arrived to see what would happen. The human ambassador was there, looking nervous and excited. Diplomats whispered to each other, placing bets on the outcome. Jake walked through the silent crowd, feeling thousands of eyes upon him. He kept his gaze forward, focusing on the throne where Matriarch Zelvora waited. Her three daughters stood beside her, each one watching Jake with emotions that were impossible to read. Kirazel stood tall and proud, her warrior's posture unchanged. But there was something softer in her silver eyes now, something that had not been there a month ago. Nyazel smiled gently, her expression warm with the friendship they had built through countless conversations. She gave Jake a small nod of encouragement. Sarazel's bioluminescent patterns danced across her skin like a living painting. Colors Jake had never seen before swirled together, revealing emotions too complex for words. Jake reached the base of the throne and bowed deeply to the matriarch. "Lieutenant Jake Harris," Zelvora announced, her voice carrying through the hall. "1 month ago, you arrived here as a stranger. You came to us not seeking glory or power, but simply because you were asked. You faced trials that would break many warriors. You engaged in discussions that would challenge many scholars. You opened your heart in ways that would frighten many souls. And through it all, you remained true to yourself." She rose from her throne and descended the steps until she stood before him. "The time has come for you to speak. My daughters have expressed their willingness to consider a union with you. The choice is now yours. What do you decide?" The hall fell completely silent. Not a breath, not a whisper. Every being in the room leaned forward, waiting for his answer. Jake took a deep breath. He had spent many sleepless nights thinking about this moment, turning the question over in his mind from every angle. Now, finally, he knew what he needed to say. "Matriarch Zelvora," he began, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Your daughters have shown me wonders I never imagined existed. Kira Zel taught me that true strength comes not from muscles, but from the refusal to surrender. Naya Zel taught me that wisdom grows when we open ourselves to understanding others. Sarazel taught me that beauty exists in the most unexpected places, if only we take the time to see it." He turned to face the three daughters, looking at each one in turn. "I care about all of you, deeply and sincerely. The connections we have built are real and precious to me, but that is exactly why I cannot choose one of you as a wife." Gasps echoed through the hall. The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Jake raised his hand, asking for silence, and somehow the room calmed. "Marriage should not be a reward," he continued. "It should not be a payment for a debt, no matter how noble the intention. Marriage should come from love that has grown naturally, from two people who have chosen each other freely, without obligation or expectation." He looked at Zelvora with respect and honesty. "I saved you because it was the right thing to do, not because I wanted anything in return. If I accepted your daughter's hands now, under these circumstances, I would be betraying the very principles that led me to help you in the first place." The matriarch studied him with unreadable eyes. The tension in the hall was thick enough to cut. Then, slowly, a smile spread across Zelvora's ancient features. "You continue to surprise me, Lieutenant Harris," she said softly. "Most beings would have jumped at this opportunity. Power, wealth, connection to one of the greatest houses in the galaxy. Yet you choose principle over profit, honor over advantage." She turned to her daughters. "What say you, my children? Do you accept his reasoning?" Kirazel stepped forward first. She approached Jake and clasped his arm in the Velarath gesture of respect between equals. "You have more courage than any warrior I have ever met," she said. "I am proud to call you a friend." Nyazel followed, bowing her head with a genuine smile. "Your wisdom exceeds your years," she said. "Perhaps someday, when circumstances are different, we might revisit this conversation. But for now, friendship is more than enough." Sarazel moved last. Her patterns glowed with soft blues and pinks as she stepped close to Jake. Without warning, she wrapped her arms around him in a hug, a gesture she had learned from Earth's cultural archives during their time together. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me, for understanding." Jake hugged her back gently, then stepped away. Zelvora approached him one final time. She placed two of her hands on his shoulders and spoke loud enough for all to hear. "You came to us as a stranger. You leave as family. The House of Zelvora will stand beside humanity, now and always. Not because of a marriage contract or a political arrangement, but because of the bond you have built through your actions and your character." She turned to address the entire hall. "Let it be known throughout the galaxy. The humans have proven themselves worthy of our respect and our friendship. Any who move against them, move against us. This is my word, and my word is law." The crowd erupted, not in protest, but in cheers and applause. Diplomats frantically sent messages to their homeworlds, spreading news that would change galactic politics forever. The human ambassador wiped tears from his eyes, overwhelmed by what had just happened. Jake stood in the center of it all, feeling both humble and hopeful. Later that evening, Jake prepared to return to the Endeavor. His shuttle waited in the landing bay, ready to carry him back to his ship and his normal life. But he knew that nothing would ever be truly normal again. The three daughters came to see him off. "Will you return?" Nyazel asked. Jake smiled. "Whenever you invite me." "You are always welcome here," Kirazel said firmly. Our training sessions are not finished. I still have much to teach you. And I have new paintings to show you, Sarazel added shyly. Jake looked at all three of them, these remarkable women who had become his friends. He had come here uncertain and afraid, and he was leaving with something far more valuable than a marriage. He was leaving with connections that would last a lifetime. Thank you, he said simply, for everything. He boarded the shuttle and watched through the window as Velarath Prime grew smaller beneath him. The crystal towers glittered in the fading light, and somewhere down there, 3 daughters were watching him leave. But it was not goodbye. It was just the beginning. When Jake returned to the Endeavor, Captain Laura was waiting for him, with an expression of pure disbelief. "You turned down marriage to alien royalty?" she asked. Jake shrugged. It was not the right time. Laura shook her head slowly. "You are either the bravest man I have ever met, or the strangest. Possibly both." Jake smiled and headed to the mess hall, where Danny was waiting with a million questions and a cold drink. Outside, the stars stretched endlessly in all directions. The galaxy was vast and full of wonders, and Jake had only scratched the surface. But he had learned something important during his time on Velarath Prime. Kindness, freely given, could change the course of history. A single act of compassion could bridge gaps between worlds and turn strangers into family. And somewhere in that infinite darkness, other species were watching humanity with new eyes. They were beginning to understand what made these small, soft creatures special. Not their strength or their technology, their hearts. Jake looked out at the stars and smiled. The future was waiting, and he was ready to meet it. The ship moved slowly through the dark emptiness of space. Lieutenant Jake Harris stood near the observation window and watched the stars pass by like tiny white dots on a black canvas. He had been serving aboard the exploration vessel Endeavor for 3 years now, and he still found himself amazed by the beauty of the universe. Jake was a simple man from a small town in Ohio. He had joined the space program because he wanted to see what existed beyond Earth. He never imagined he would travel so far from home, but here he was, millions of miles away from everything he had ever known. The Endeavor was on a routine patrol mission near the edge of the Kepler system. Nothing exciting had happened for weeks. The crew was bored, and Jake spent most of his time reading old books on his tablet or talking with his friend Danny Cole in the mess hall. That changed on a quiet Tuesday morning. Jake was checking the sensor readings when something unusual appeared on his screen. A small object was drifting about 200 kilometers away from their position. At first, he thought it was space debris, but the shape was too regular, too deliberate. He zoomed in on the image and felt his heart skip a beat. It was a shuttle, badly damaged, with smoke leaking from its hull. The design was unlike anything humans had built. This was an alien vessel. Jake immediately contacted Captain Laura Bennett on the bridge. She was a stern woman with gray hair and sharp eyes, known for following rules without exception. When Jake told her about the damaged shuttle, she frowned. "We should report this to command and wait for instructions," she said. "Captain, there might be survivors," Jake replied. "They could be dying while we wait." Laura studied him for a long moment. She knew Jake was right, but protocols existed for good reasons. Contact with unknown alien species could be dangerous. They had no idea who was inside that shuttle, or what their intentions might be. But Jake did not give up. He kept talking, kept pushing, kept reminding her that saving lives was more important than following paperwork. Finally, Laura sighed and gave her permission. "Take a small team," she ordered. "Be careful, and if anything feels wrong, you get out of there immediately." Jake grabbed 2 other crew members, a medic named Chris Porter and an engineer named Lisa Grant, and they boarded a rescue pod. The trip to the damaged shuttle took only 15 minutes, but it felt like hours. When they arrived, Jake was the first to enter. The inside of the shuttle was dark and filled with smoke. Emergency lights flickered red, casting strange shadows on the walls. He moved carefully, his flashlight cutting through the haze. He found bodies first, 4 of them, alien soldiers wearing armor that had been torn apart by weapons fire. They were dead, their silver blood pooled beneath them. Jake felt sadness for these beings he had never met. Someone had attacked them without mercy. Then he heard a sound, a weak, rasping breath coming from the back of the shuttle. Jake rushed forward and found her. An elderly alien woman was slumped against the wall, clutching a wound on her side. She was tall, even while sitting, with deep violet skin that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. She had 4 slender arms, 2 of which hung limp at her sides. Her eyes were like pools of liquid silver, and they looked up at Jake with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Jake knelt beside her and spoke gently. "It is okay. I am here to help you." The alien woman studied his face. She did not seem to understand his words, but she understood his tone. She relaxed slightly, allowing him to examine her wounds. The injuries were severe. Jake was no doctor, and he had no idea how this alien body worked. Her blood was silver, her organs were in different places, and her skin had a texture he had never felt before. But he refused to let her die. He called Chris over, and together they worked for hours. They used the basic medical supplies they had brought, improvising solutions when nothing seemed to fit. Jake wrapped her wounds with bandages designed for human skin. He used painkillers that might not even work on her species. He talked to her constantly, telling her stories about Earth, about his childhood, about anything that came to mind. The alien woman listened. She could not understand his language, but his voice seemed to comfort her. She stopped shaking. Her breathing became steadier. At some point during those long hours, she reached out with one of her working hands and touched Jake's arm. It was a simple gesture, but it carried meaning. She was thanking him. When the Endeavor's full medical team finally arrived, they were shocked. The alien woman was stable. Against all odds, Jake had kept her alive, using nothing but determination and basic supplies. The doctors took over, transporting her to the ship's medical bay, where they could provide proper treatment. Jake stood back and watched, exhausted but relieved. Captain Laura approached him later that evening. She looked at him with an expression he could not quite read. "You know who she is, do you not?" Laura asked. Jake shook his head. "No, just someone who needed help." Laura handed him a tablet, showing information gathered from the shuttle's database. "Her name is Matriarch Zelvora. She is the leader of the 3rd Great House of Velarath Prime, one of the most powerful figures in the galaxy." Jake stared at the screen, unable to believe what he was reading. The Velarath were famous throughout known space. They were an ancient and proud species who rarely interacted with others. They considered most alien races beneath them, especially humans, whom they viewed as primitive newcomers to the galactic stage. And Jake had just saved the life of one of their most important leaders. "What happens now?" he asked. Laura shook her head. "I have no idea. But I suspect our lives are about to get very interesting." In the medical bay, Matriarch Zelvora lay in a bed designed for a species much smaller than her own. She was awake now, her silver eyes staring at the ceiling. The human doctors had saved her, using techniques she did not understand. But it was the young male who had found her that occupied her thoughts. He had risked everything to save a stranger. He had worked for hours without rest, refusing to let her die. He had shown her kindness without asking for anything in return. Among her people, Such actions carried great weight. A debt had been created, one that could not be ignored. Zelvora closed her eyes and made a silent promise. She would repay this human, no matter what it took. And she already had an idea of how to do it.